Last time, we walked through 25,000 years of Republic history, and the one thing it proved is that both the Sith and the Jedi were a damned menace to this galaxy. But we stopped at 19 BBY, right when it got dark. So here's where we pick up. Order 66, the night the clones turned. The moment the galaxy exhaled and told itself the cycle was finally over, the Sith extinct, the Jedi destroyed, the long war between them reduced to two robed survivors limping away from burning temples. It felt like an ending. Historians inside that galaxy would have called it one. 1,000 generations of Force user conflict, finally resolved by a single command and a set of chips implanted in the base of every clone trooper's skull. Except it wasn't an ending. It was the same disease wearing a new uniform. That's the argument here, and I'm going to make it plainly. Order 66 wasn't the terminus of the Sith and Jedi's 25,000-year cycle of mutual destruction. It was its latest mutation. Everything that followed, the Dark Times, the Empire, the Rebellion, Palpatine's literal return from the dead in a cloned body, the New Republic's fragile reconstruction nearly shattered 5 years after Endor, all of it was the same grinding cycle, same structural logic, higher body counts. The galaxy didn't cure the disease in 19 BBY, it gave it a new host. And the most damning evidence for that argument isn't the Sith, it's the Jedi. Because you can't have this conversation without being honest about what the Jedi Order was by the time Palpatine pulled the trigger. Part 1. The patient already had the disease. To understand 19 BBY, you need to understand 1000 BBY, specifically what happened at Ruusan. The 7th Battle of Ruusan ended the Brotherhood of Darkness, the last Sith army to fight in the open. Darth Bane watched it collapse from infighting, then walked away and built something new, the Rule of Two. One master to embody power, one apprentice to crave it. No armies, no open war, pure infiltration. And the Republic, believing the Sith were extinct, did something that should have alarmed everyone paying attention. It dismantled its entire military. The Ruusan reformations left the Galactic Republic with the Jedi Order and essentially a Coast Guard. That was the planet-spanning democratic civilization's entire defense apparatus. A monastic order of Force sensitives and some patrol vessels. For 1,000 years, the Republic confused peace with the absence of visible enemies. The Jedi became the standing army of a government that officially had no standing army. And somewhere in that millennium, the Order stopped being peacekeepers and started being a religious institution so entangled with the Republic's survival that the two couldn't be separated. Which meant that when one fell, the other would fall with it. The Jedi Council knew something was wrong long before 19 BBY. Sifo Dyas, a Jedi Master who had held a seat on that same council, commissioned a clone army in secret after having visions of a coming conflict. He saw it. He acted on it. And then Dooku, himself a former Jedi turned Sith, arranged Sifo Dyas's murder through the Pike Syndicate and concealed the circumstances of his death from the Order entirely. So the Jedi ended up with an army they didn't commission, couldn't fully trace, and whose origins were buried under layers of deliberate misdirection. When Clone Trooper Tup's inhibitor chip malfunctioned and caused the accidental killing of a Jedi general, ARC Trooper 5's investigated. He got close to the truth, close enough that he had to be drugged, discredited, and killed before he could expose the conspiracy. The official version framed him as having attempted to assassinate the Chancellor. Here is the most damning detail. When the Jedi Council discovered the suspicious origins of the clone army, Grandmaster Yoda insisted they deliberately choose not to disclose what they knew to the public or the Chancellor, for fear of losing public trust. Read that sequence again carefully, not as shocking revelation but as institutional logic. The Jedi Council found evidence of a conspiracy they couldn't explain, and their response was to protect their own reputation. They buried it, and they handed their armies to the Senate, walked into the war, and called themselves generals. This isn't a minor bureaucratic failure. The Jedi Order spent the entire Clone Wars commanding troops engineered to kill them on command, and the Council's response to mounting evidence of this was to suppress it. The Jedi weren't purely innocent victims of Order 66. They were an institution so committed to its own indispensability that it couldn't see the trap it was standing in. 13 years. Palpatine sat on the Jedi Council's doorstep as Supreme Chancellor for 13 years. A Sith Lord operating in open daylight, and the Order didn't detect him. Their vaunted connection to the Force had been compromised. The dark side had blinded them, and rather than treat that blindness as a 5-alarm warning, they continued to serve as the Republic's primary military force, continued to deploy into a war their enemy had manufactured, and continued to arrest politicians who questioned Palpatine's expanding authority. They called themselves the Guardians of Peace and Justice. By the Clone Wars, they were the Republic's most effective weapon. Those two things aren't compatible, and the Order never reconciled them. Part 2. What Palpatine actually built. On the day Palpatine declared the First Galactic Empire in 19 BBY, standing before the Senate in robes, half his face destroyed, having just survived what he described as a Jedi assassination attempt, the galaxy celebrated. Relief is the more honest word. The Clone Wars had killed millions. The Separatist leadership was already dead. Palpatine had personally survived an attack by Jedi. The Senate voted for the Empire with applause. They had no idea what they'd voted for. The empire Palpatine built wasn't simply an authoritarian government. Authoritarian governments follow a recognizable logic: consolidate power, suppress dissent, extract resources, maintain order. The Empire did all of those things. But underneath the Tarkin doctrine, the philosophy of rule through fear, and the Death Star as its ultimate expression, there was something else. Palpatine had spent 1,000 years of Sith succession working toward a specific endgame. His empire was a dark side machine. The Tarkin doctrine was a military philosophy, a deterrence strategy. The Death Star was its symbol. But Palpatine's actual goal, as the culmination of the Rule of Two, wasn't just political control. It was Force domination of the galaxy itself. The Rule of Two had been Bane's mechanism for concentrating darkside power across generations until a Sith Lord could finally transcend it. Palpatine believed he was that Sith Lord. The Emperor's hands, a network of Force-sensitive personal assassins operating across the galaxy, each unaware the others existed, weren't simply intelligence assets. They were instruments of Force user supremacy concentrated in a single hand. His hand. Mara Jade was the most capable of them. Trained from childhood in espionage, combat, piloting, mechanics, and the Force, she carried out missions across the galaxy under direct Imperial mandate. She had no idea other hands existed. That was deliberate. Palpatine gave each of them just enough power to be useful and not enough to be a threat. It was the Rule of Two applied laterally. Force-sensitive operatives with galaxy-spanning reach, all reporting to one man, none capable of challenging him. Lumia was another hand. She would later found her own Sith lineage. Mara Jade would eventually become a Jedi. Both of them are the Rule of Two's shadow. The Emperor's training program producing Force users he couldn't ultimately control, scattered across the post-Imperial galaxy like seeds. The Compnor apparatus, the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order, handled the ideological machinery: education, propaganda, youth indoctrination. The Inquisitorius, a secret division of Imperial intelligence staffed by dark side adepts, handled the Jedi survivors. Their primary duty was to hunt, capture, and interrogate. They weren't random enforcers. They were the Empire's mechanism for ensuring Force user supremacy remained exclusive, that the dark side had no competitors it hadn't authorized. Darth Vader ran the most visible of those operations himself. Part 3. The Dark Times. Vader's assault on the Jedi Temple in 19 BBY, Operation Nightfall, wasn't just a purge. The temple was subsequently converted into a training facility for Vader's secret apprentice, Galen Marek, son of Kento Marek, a Jedi in hiding on Kashyyyk. That is the Empire's institutional logic in miniature. Destroy the Jedi Order, inherit its infrastructure, use it to manufacture the next generation of Force users loyal to the Sith. The survivors scattered. Ram Koda was a Jedi general who had refused to use clone troopers in his command, using only regular volunteers, a quirk that meant his troops had no inhibitor chips and therefore didn't turn on him at Order 66. He survived. Kazdan Paratus fled to Raxus Prime and built a mechanical simulacrum of the Jedi Temple from scrap in a kind of Force-induced madness. Fallon Gray went underground. Kento Merrick hid on Kashyyyk until Vader found him. These are the men the Dark Times was built on. Jedi who'd lost their order, their republic, and their purpose, reduced to hiding, survival, or slow psychological unraveling. Not heroes in any operational sense, survivors mostly, and the Inquisitors were specifically designed to find them. Vader's own psychology in this period is the most interesting tragedy in the entire Legends continuity. He knew what he was. He'd chosen it on the Mustafar platform, convinced it was the only way to save Padme, and she had died anyway. The empire that followed wasn't what he'd sacrificed everything for, but he was too far in, too broken, too committed to the dark side's corruption to back out. So he served. He hunted Jedi. He built the apparatus of Imperial terror. And somewhere underneath the armor, Anakin Skywalker was still alive, and Palpatine knew it, and the entire structure of the Sith master-apprentice relationship depended on keeping that flicker from catching. Meanwhile, Mara Jade was being trained. Compnor was being built. The Death Star was under construction. The Inquisitorius was hunting. The Senate, whatever remained of it, was being stripped of authority year by year until, by 0 BBY, when the Death Star became operational and Alderaan burned, Palpatine felt comfortable dissolving it entirely. Tarkin called it an end to the last remnants of the Old Republic. Palpatine called it something closer to completion. 19 years. The Dark Times lasted 19 years. In those 19 years, the Jedi went from 10,000 strong to a handful of hiding survivors. The Republic became the Empire. A galaxy of trillions lived inside a Sith religious project and didn't know what to call what they were feeling. Part 4. The Rebellion, or How the Galaxy Learned Nothing. 3 people, a secret meeting in the Corellian system, and a declaration. That's how the Rebel Alliance began in Legends. Bail Organa of Alderaan, Mon Mothma of Chandrila, and Garm Bel Iblis of Corellia, the 3 architects of the organized resistance. They called it the Corellian Treaty, this founding compact between resistance cells. They had different visions for what they were building, and those differences would matter. Bel Iblis was a military realist. He'd run the Corellian resistance as his own operation, financed with his own resources, answering to his own judgment. Mon Mothma was a political idealist with unimpeachable credentials and a talent for building consensus. The tension between those 2 philosophies, between the man who thought the alliance was his war to run and the woman building a legitimate government in exile, eventually broke them. Bel Iblis split from the alliance entirely. He maintained his own private military force, fought the Empire on his own terms, and didn't rejoin the unified Rebel Alliance until the Thrawn campaign in 9 ABY, 5 years after Endor. He missed the Battle of Yavin. He missed the Battle of Endor. The Alliance's founding triumvirate fractured, and 1/3 of it spent the Liberation War fighting alone. That's not a footnote. That's a structural preview of everything that would follow. The rebellion won at Yavin by blowing up a moon-sized battle station with a proton torpedo and a force-sensitive pilot following the voice of a dead man. The rebellion won at Endor because an aging Sith Lord chose his son over his Emperor in the last seconds of his life. Both victories were cosmically dependent on Force users at the critical moment. Luke Skywalker wasn't incidental to the rebellion's success. He was its axis. The Last Jedi, the son of Anakin Skywalker, the instrument of the prophecy that Palpatine had spent decades corrupting. By Endor, the Rebel Alliance had reorganized its entire strategic calculus around Luke's potential. The Emperor had too. 2 sides of the same war, and both of them had a Force-sensitive man at the center of their planning. Sound familiar? The Republic had built its defense around the Jedi Order and been destroyed when that dependency was weaponized. The rebellion built its hope around a single Jedi and called it liberation. The galaxy had not actually changed its fundamental relationship with Force user supremacy. It had simply changed which Force users it was depending on. When Vader threw Palpatine down the Death Star's reactor shaft in 4 ABY, the galaxy exhaled for the second time. Twice now, it had believed the cycle was broken. It wasn't. It was inhaling. Part 5. The Man Who Planned His Own Death. Here is what Palpatine had arranged before he died. On a hidden fortress world called Biss, deep in the galactic core, the Emperor had prepared clone bodies. Not as an emergency contingency, as a deliberate, premeditated plan to survive his own death. The Sith technique is called transfer essence, a force power enabling consciousness to occupy a new body at the moment of the old body's destruction. Palpatine had practiced it. He had the target vessels waiting. The moment Vader threw him into that reactor shaft, Palpatine's force essence transferred into a prepared clone on Biss. The battle station exploded. The galaxy celebrated. The Empire began fragmenting into competing warlords, and Palpatine, in a fresh body, watched it all from his hidden citadel and waited. He waited 6 years. In 4 ABY, the same year as Endor, Palpatine technically revived himself. But the reborn Sith Empire didn't make itself publicly known until 10 ABY. 6 years of the galaxy thinking it had won. 6 years of the New Republic believing it was building something that would last. There's a problem with the clone bodies, though. The dark side corrupts biological matter. Every time Palpatine's force essence inhabited a new clone, the dark side energy tore through it, degrading the tissue, accelerating cellular breakdown. Each body lasted less time than the one before. Palpatine was running a controlled burn through his own reserves, growing more desperate with each transfer, his windows of stable existence shrinking. The weapon he deployed to announce his return was the World Devastators. Not Star Destroyers, not another Death Star. World Devastators were self-sustaining engines of industrial annihilation, machines that descended on a planet's surface, consumed its raw matter and resources in real time, and used those consumed materials to produce war material, troops, and additional war machines in an endless, self-sustaining loop. You couldn't destroy a world devastator by cutting off its supply lines. It made its own supply lines from the ground it was standing on. While that was happening, Palpatine was on Biss, in his reclaimed empire, working on a contingency for his contingency. He needed a more permanent solution to the clone degradation problem, a body that could hold his power without breaking down, a force-sensitive body, the perfect vessel. He found one in Leia Organa Solo's unborn child. In the Dark Empire comic, written by Tom Veitch with art by Cam Kennedy, published by Dark Horse Comics in 1991 and 1992, Palpatine attempts to possess Leia's unborn son, the child who would be named Anakin Solo, the grandson of the man Palpatine had spent decades destroying. He reached for the infant, attempted the transfer essence technique on a body that hadn't drawn its first breath, and Leia resisted him. The attempt failed, but the attempt happened. Sit with what that means, not as drama, but as political philosophy. The Sith Emperor, supposedly destroyed at the Battle of Endor in the moment of the galaxy's liberation, had returned in a cloned body, built a new war fleet, including the Eclipse-class dreadnought, a jet-black warship 17.5 kilometers long, with its own scaled superlaser capable of cracking a planet's crust, deployed planet-consuming weapons against the New Republic, and then tried to possess an infant to solve his immortality problem. 6 years after Endor. Luke was seduced during this period, not metaphorically. Palpatine personally drew Skywalker to the dark side, made him his apprentice, and for a time, Luke Skywalker stood in black robes at the Emperor's side, while his sister fought to reach him. Tom Veitch built a storyline that the Thrawn trilogy had deliberately avoided, Luke actually falling, actually putting on the mask. This is the arc Timothy Zahn reportedly criticized, believing it undermined the completion of Luke's character at Endor. They were both right and both wrong. Zahn's objection is legitimate craft criticism. Veitch's version is philosophically devastating to the thesis that the cycle had ended. Because if Luke Skywalker, the man who redeemed Darth Vader through love alone, could be pulled to the dark side 6 years after Endor by a decrepit emperor in a clone body, then the Jedi's triumph at Endor wasn't a structural change to anything. It was a battle won inside a war that wasn't over. Luke broke free. The Dark Empire arc ends with the heroes destroying the clone factory on Biss, eliminating Palpatine's reserve of prepared bodies, and forcing his increasingly unstable essence into bodies that lasted days rather than months. His final defeat came at the Battle of Onderon, in the storyline collected as Empire's End. By then, Palpatine was desperate enough to attempt possession of whatever vessel was available. A wounded Jedi named Impetogeos Brand, his synthetic body destroyed beyond recovery, recognized what Palpatine was doing. Brand bound his own departing Force essence to Palpatine's at the moment of his death, dragging the Emperor into whatever came after and denying him any further transfer. Not the Force actively rejecting him. One dying man grabbing the most dangerous Force user in history by the collar and refusing to let go. That is Palpatine's Legend's death. One man's sacrifice, not a cosmic reckoning. The cycle didn't end because the universe decided it should. It ended because Impetogeos Brand refused to die alone. Disney adapted the concept of Palpatine's return for The Rise of Skywalker in 2019. What Disney kept: the clone body, the hidden world, the vague transfer mechanic. What Disney dropped: the 6-year build, the world devastators, the possession attempt on an infant, Luke's actual fall to the dark side, and the specific sacrifice of Brand that provided a concrete in-universe mechanism for permanent death. The Legends version is more horrifying, more earned, and more philosophically coherent. It's also more damning to any triumphalist reading of Endor, which may be why it wasn't adapted. Part 6. The Republic That Almost Wasn't. 4 years after Endor, the New Republic was technically winning. Coruscant had been liberated. The Imperial remnant was fragmented. The old Senate was being reconstructed. Luke was training new Force sensitives. By any measure of the story the rebellion told itself, this should have been the slow work of consolidation. Then, Grand Admiral Thrawn came home. Mithra Nuruodo, Thrawn, had been operating in the unknown regions when the Empire fell. A Chiss, the only non-human ever to achieve Grand Admiral rank in Palpatine's deeply speciesist military. He returned in 9 ABY to find a fractured Imperial remnant and, apparently, an opportunity. What followed is the Thrawn campaign, documented in Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire trilogy, starting in 1991, the novels that effectively invented the Legends post-Endor continuity. Thrawn's tactical genius wasn't Force sensitivity, it was art. He studied the artwork of every species he encountered, believing that a civilization's art revealed its psychology, its fears, its decision-making patterns. He didn't need the Force to predict his enemies. He needed their paintings. Against a new republic still organizing itself from the wreckage of the rebellion, this was more than enough. His specific tactical innovation against Force users was the Ysalamiri, small creatures native to Merkur that had evolved the ability to push back the Force within a bubble around their bodies. Attach a harness full of Ysalamiri to a portable frame, and you had a Force null zone that traveled with your command staff. Thrawn kept them on his bridge specifically. No Jedi prescience, no Force-enhanced threat detection, no warning from the light side, just conventional warfare. And Thrawn was exceptionally good at conventional warfare. He captured the Katana fleet, a group of 200 Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers, the so-called Dark Force fleet, that had drifted unmanned in deep space for decades after its crew went mad and jumped to hyperspace together. He used Mount Tantus on Wayland, a hidden Emperor's storehouse, to produce clone soldiers at an accelerated rate. Within 9 months of beginning his campaign, he had pushed the New Republic back across multiple sectors and was threatening Coruscant itself. But Thrawn had a problem: Joruus C'baoth. C'Baoth had been a Jedi Master. In the Legends continuity, a respected council-level figure who had disappeared on the outbound flight mission decades earlier. Thrawn had made a deal with C'Baoth to secure his assistance with the campaign in exchange for Luke and Leia Organa Solo as Jedi pupils. Except Joruus C'Baoth was dead. The being Thrawn encountered was Joruus C'Baoth, an insane clone of the original Jedi Master, produced at the same Mount Tantus facility. His connection to the Force was real. His psychology was shattered. Joruus C'Baoth's madness expressed itself in a particular way. He believed Force users should rule. Not guide, not protect. Rule. He wanted to take control of the Emperor's remaining forces and reshape the galaxy with Force-sensitive hands at the top of every hierarchy. There is a name for that philosophy. It's about 10,000 years old. It's exactly what the Jedi Order kept trying to avoid becoming, and kept inching toward anyway. Joruus C'Baoth was a cloned Jedi who had become, functionally, a Sith without a name. A dark Jedi, legends would call him. An unstable Force user who had broken from the light without the ideological architecture of the Rule of Two. And he was the mad piece in Thrawn's otherwise disciplined campaign. Thrawn was killed by his own Noghri bodyguard, a member of a species the Empire had subjugated by destroying their world's ecosystem through the contamination of Honogre's soil, keeping the Noghri in servitude by controlling the decontamination of their own planet. When Leia revealed the truth about what Vader had done to their world, the Noghri loyalty transferred. Thrawn's assassination came from within his own ranks, the consequence of a decades-old Imperial atrocity that Vader had personally overseen. Even the Empire's victories had costs that eventually circled back. Joruus C'Baoth died at the same time, killed in a confrontation with Mara Jade, herself the Emperor's former hand, carrying Palpatine's dying command to kill Luke Skywalker as a compulsion she couldn't fully shake. The Thrawn campaign collapsed. The New Republic survived. 5 years after Endor. Thrawn had nearly destroyed the New Republic 5 years after Endor. There would be a second Imperium. There would be more Imperial warlords. The fragmentation of the Empire into competing factions after Palpatine's death meant years of smaller, grinding conflicts. The Imperial remnant contracting slowly, fighting over its own succession, producing a string of self-appointed leaders, none of whom could replicate Palpatine or Thrawn. Eventually, the remnant under Admiral Pellaeon would sue for peace, signing the Pellaeon-Gavrisum Treaty in 19 ABY, 15 years after Endor. The Empire didn't end at Endor. It took 15 more years of war to produce a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Luke was building the new Jedi Order at the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4, the same moon where the first Death Star had been destroyed, which is either poetic or on the nose, depending on your tolerance for the Force's sense of humor. His founding philosophy was consciously different from the old orders. No prohibition on attachment, no removal of children from families at infancy, no rigid council hierarchy. He had watched the old Jedi's institutional failures destroy them. He was trying to build something that wouldn't repeat those mistakes. Whether he succeeded is a question the Legends continuity would spend decades answering, running all the way through the new Jedi Order series, the Legacy of the Force, and beyond. The short answer is, partially. The longer answer is that his nephew Jacen Solo would eventually fall to the dark side and become Darth Caedus, that the Sith lineage Lumia founded, drawing on Palpatine's own Emperor's Hand training program, would outlast the Emperor himself, and that the New Republic would be shattered by the Yuuzhan Vong invasion in 25 ABY, a threat the New Republic's Force-centric worldview had left it entirely unprepared for, because the Yuuzhan Vong existed outside the Force entirely. The galaxy built its entire early warning system on Force prescience, and then got hit by an extragalactic civilization that showed up as nothing in the Force at all. That is what happens when you make Force users the axis of your civilization's defense apparatus for 25,000 years, and then someone knocks on the door who doesn't generate a signal. Part 7. The Hutts would like a word. While all of this was happening, the Republic, the Old Sith Empire, the New Sith Wars, the Brotherhood of Darkness, the Clone Wars, the Empire, the Rebellion, the New Republic, Palpatine's return, the Thrawn campaign. The Hutt clans were open for business. The Hutts predate the Republic as a functioning power. The clans of the ancients, the Hutt council structure, the territories that would become Hutt space. These existed before the Prelemian trade route linked Coruscant to Ossus in 25,000 BBY. Through the Great Hyperspace War, when Naga Sadow's Sith Empire swept out of the Outer Rim and shook the Republic to its foundations, the Hutts were present and operational. Through the New Sith Wars and the 1,000 years of attrition that followed Ruusan, the Hutts maintained their territories. Through the Clone Wars, Hutt space operated with enough sovereignty that both the Republic and the Separatists courted Jabba the Hutt's cooperation with the Outer Rim trade routes, rather than attempt to occupy his territory. The Empire's relationship with Hutt space was a tribute and tolerance arrangement. Palpatine's forces didn't meaningfully occupy it, and the Hutts didn't formally resist. Jabba de Siligic Tur died in 4 ABY when Leia Organa strangled him with his own chain on his sail barge above the Pit of Carkoon. He was killed by a slave. This was a personal failure, not an institutional one. The Hutt clans survived Jabba. They survived the Empire. They survived the New Republic. The criminal infrastructure legends built around Hutt space persisted through every single regime change in galactic history. The Hutts don't have a Force tradition. They don't have a cosmic philosophy about the nature of power and balance. They have territory, leverage, and a multi-thousand-year cultural commitment to not dying in someone else's war. They viewed Force users as useful, dangerous, and fundamentally unpredictable. Tools when manageable, threats when not. Their entire operating philosophy was to never become ideologically dependent on one. The Sith spent 25,000 years trying to dominate the galaxy. The Jedi spent 25,000 years trying to protect it. The Hutts spent 25,000 years running organized crime across it, and they outlasted both of them. If you were designing a civilization for long-term survival, the Hutts model, cynical, transactional, structurally independent of any Force user power block, performed better than either alternative. One of the highest engagement comments on the Republic video made exactly this point in a single line. Once every 200 years sounds pretty good compared to what the Jedi and Sith produced. That's not just a funny observation. It's structurally correct. The Hutt clans achieved multi-generational stability through regime changes that shattered every Force user government in history. The galaxy's most durable institution was a criminal cartel that didn't have a prophecy. Part 8. What the cycle actually looks like from the outside. Here is the pattern from 7,000 BBY to 9 ABY compressed. The 100-year darkness ended with Sith exiles banished to the Outer Rim in 6,900 BBY. Those exiles built an empire. They came back in 5,000 BBY under Naga Sadow and nearly destroyed the Republic in the Great Hyperspace War. The Republic recovered. The Sith fragmented, rebuilt, returned under different names and different leadership. This cycle repeated across millennia. Sith Empire, defeat, reformation, return, until Darth Bane changed the mechanism at Ruusan around 1000 BBY. The rule of two replaced armies with patience. 1,000 years of infiltration followed. Palpatine was the end product. His empire was the Sith cycle's most complete expression. Not an army, not a battle station, but an entire galaxy reorganized as a dark side machine, with Force user supremacy concentrated in 2 people and their network of trained operatives. The rebellion destroyed the visible machine. The cycle produced a clone of the machine's architect. The clone tried to possess an infant to sustain itself. The New Republic defeated the clone and almost immediately faced a military genius who nearly reversed everything using Force-nullifying lizards and a mad clone of a dead Jedi. Inside the New Republic, the revived Jedi Order would eventually produce another Sith, Luke's own nephew, through the same pattern of attachment, trauma, and failed guidance that produced Anakin Skywalker 2 generations earlier. The disease didn't need the Sith to continue. It just needed Force users in positions of structural importance, and the galaxy to keep building its hope and its defense and its destiny around them. That is the thesis, and the evidence for it runs from 7,000 BBY to at least 25 ABY. 25,000 years of the same structural failure. The Ruusan reformations made the Jedi the Republic's only military and called it peace. Order 66 ended the Jedi and called it liberation. Endor ended the Sith and called it victory. Each of those moments was real. None of them broke the underlying pattern, because the pattern isn't about which Force users are in power. It's about a galaxy that can't stop making Force users the axis of its civilization. Luke Skywalker knew this at some level. His new Jedi Order rejected the most destructive features of the old one. He was trying to produce something that could serve without dominating, guide without governing, train without institutionalizing the kind of arrogance that made the pre-war council functionally blind. Whether the Legends continuity gave him credit for partial success or eventual failure depends on which era you're reading. Legacy of the Force, set in 40 ABY, gives you a Jedi Order that produced Darth Caedus from its own ranks. The new Jedi Order series, set during the Yuuzhan Vong War, gives you a republic so dependent on Jedi leadership that losing them nearly means losing everything. The New Republic's constitution, its political institutions, its military command, all of it was rebuilt in the shadow of Force user conflict and organized largely around Force user leadership. The Senate's gridlock and factionalism were real problems, documented throughout the Legends New Republic era. But the structural vulnerability wasn't political gridlock. It was the same thing it had always been. A civilization that measured its safety by its Force-sensitive heroes, rather than its institutional resilience. 5 years after Endor, one tactically brilliant, non-Force-sensitive military commander nearly ended the New Republic with a captured fleet and some Force-immune lizards. Imagine what an actual Sith resurrection could do to it. Then stop imagining, because Tom Veitch and Cam Kennedy showed you exactly what it did. Closing, The Reckoning. 25,000 years of Republic history, then 19 years of Empire, then the Rebellion and the New Republic and Palpatine's return and Thrawn and all the grinding, costly aftermath. The lore argument is simple, and the Legends continuity proves it repeatedly. The problem was never the Sith specifically. The Sith were a symptom. The problem was a galaxy that couldn't build durable institutions because its most powerful individuals, Force-sensitive, cosmically connected, either trained by the Jedi or shaped by the dark side, always ended up at the center of every major conflict, every succession crisis, every moment of civilizational collapse. Take out the Sith, and the Jedi's own institutional failures become the dominant factor. Take out the Jedi, and the vacuum gets filled by dark side adepts, Emperor's hands, mad cloned Jedi, or a returning Sith Emperor with a factory full of prepared bodies on a hidden fortress world. Order 66 wasn't the story's end. Endor wasn't the story's end. The New Republic wasn't the story's end. Each of them was the cycle arriving at a new stage while wearing a different face. Palpatine planned his own resurrection before the rebellion blew up his battle station. A Chiss Grand Admiral nearly destroyed the New Republic 5 years after the celebration at Endor. A clone of a dead Jedi Master became a dark-side warlord within the Empire's own campaign structure. Luke Skywalker briefly stood as Palpatine's new apprentice 6 years after returning his father from the dark side. And the Hutt clans, throughout all of it, ran their supply routes and collected their tribute and outlasted everyone with a prophecy. That's not tragic irony, that's the historical record. The Legends continuity, from Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire in 1991 through Tom Veitch and Cam Kennedy's Dark Empire in 1991 and 1992, through the entire sprawl of novels and comics that Disney eventually shelved as non-canon, built a post-Endor galaxy that refused to let the heroes rest on the meaning of their victory. Real fans have always known this. The continuity they called canon long after the official reclassification is canon precisely because it didn't let the rebellion's triumph flatten into a simple ending. It asked the harder question. What do you do with a galaxy that has always organized itself around Force users, now that you've won a war against Force users? The answer Legends gave is uncomfortable and honest. You rebuild. You make some of the same mistakes. You produce a new generation of Jedi who try to do better and partially succeed. And somewhere in the outer darkness, the cycle is already taking its next breath. We stopped this chapter at roughly 12 ABY, Palpatine's final death, Thrawn's campaign, the New Republic's first attempt at reconstruction. But there's more. The Jedi Academy trilogy, the Darksaber, the Hand of Thrawn duology, the New Jedi Order and the Yuuzhan Vong, Legacy of the Force and Jacen Solo's fall. The Legacy comics set a century after the Skywalkers, when a new Sith Order has risen, the Jedi have been destroyed again, and the cycle has made its next revolution. If you want to keep going, let me know in the comments what era you want next, what you want me to dig into. This continuity runs deep enough that we could spend months in it and not hit the bottom. And if you've been listening to this on your commute, or working a night shift, or lying awake at 3 in the morning, I'm glad you're here. Genuinely. This one was a long time in the making, and these stories deserve the time. Subscribe if you want to be there for the next chapter. We've got a lot of galaxy left to cover.